The Madrid sun was shining brightly that spring morning when I woke up next to Carlos, my husband of 5 years. Our apartment in the heart of the city was a testament to our hard work and years of saving. Every corner was filled with memories, from our first romantic dinner to the long nights of conversation on the balcony. "Morning, love," I murmured, stretching lazily. Carlos was already awake, checking his phone with a frown. "Good morning," he replied absently. "Mom's not feeling well again." I sighed internally. Dolores, my mother-in-law, had been complaining of various ailments in recent months, but nothing seemed serious. However, the concern in Carlos's voice made me feel a chill. "What's wrong this time?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "He says he has chest pains and difficulty breathing," Carlos explained, already getting up and hurriedly dressing. "I'm going to go see her." I nodded, understanding his concern. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No, it's not necessary. You have to go to work, remember? You have that important presentation today." It was true. As an architect at a prestigious firm, I had a crucial presentation for a new project that could boost my career. He had worked tirelessly on it for weeks. "You're right," I said, standing up as well. "But please keep me informed." Carlos nodded absent-mindedly and left the apartment in a hurry, leaving me with an uneasy feeling that I couldn't shake. As I got ready for work, my thoughts wandered between the presentation and Dolores' health. Despite our initial differences, we had reached a mutual understanding over time. We weren't the best of friends, but there was respect between us. On the subway, on the way to work, I received a message from Carlos. "Mom is in the hospital. The doctors say it could be serious." My heart raced. Serious? What exactly did that mean? I wanted to call him right away, but the subway was crowded and noisy. I would have to wait. When I got to the office, I locked myself in my cubicle and was finally able to call Carlos. "What did the doctors say?" I asked bluntly. "They're doing tests," he responded in a tense voice. "They suspect it could be a heart problem." "Oh, Carlos," I sighed, feeling his distress through the phone. "Do you want me to go to the hospital after work?" There was a pause before he responded. "Yeah, I think that would be good." After hanging up, I dove into my work, trying to stay focused on the presentation ahead. But my mind kept wandering to Dolores and Carlos, wondering how this would affect our lives. The presentation was a success, despite my concern. My colleagues congratulated me, but I barely registered their words. As soon as I could, I ran to the hospital. I found Carlos in the waiting room, with his face pale and haggard. I sat next to him and took his hand. "Any news?" I asked softly. He shook his head. "They're still doing tests. But the doctor said his heart is weak." We stood in silence, the gravity of the situation weighing on us. While we waited, I couldn't help but think about our life together, about the house we had bought with so much effort. I remembered the long nights I spent reviewing contracts, negotiating with the bank to get the best interest rate for our mortgage. It had been an exhausting process, but it was worth it. Every month when I made the payment, I felt a mix of pride and responsibility. "Carlos," I said softly, "whatever happens with your mother, we will get through it together." He looked at me gratefully, but I could see a shadow of doubt in his eyes. "Thank you," he murmured, squeezing my hand. At that moment, a doctor approached us. "Relatives of Dolores Martinez?" We stood up immediately. "Yes, it's us," Carlos responded with a trembling voice. "I'm afraid I have some concerning news," said the doctor in a serious tone. "The test results indicate that donor Dolores has serious heart disease. We will need to do more tests, but she will likely require intensive treatment and possibly surgery." I felt Carlos stagger next to me and I held him steady. "What's the prognosis, doctor?" I asked, trying to stay calm. "It's hard to say right now. A lot will depend on how he responds to the initial treatment. But they should prepare for a long recovery process." As the doctor continued to explain the details of the treatment, my mind was spinning. How would this affect our lives? To our finances? The mortgage on the house was a major responsibility, and now we had to consider Dolores' medical expenses. That night, as I drove home with Carlos silently by my side, I couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had changed in our lives. Our marriage, which had seemed so solid that morning, suddenly felt fragile and vulnerable. Walking into our apartment, I looked around with new eyes. Every object, every piece of furniture, seemed a reminder of the life we had built together and how quickly things could change. "I'm going to take a shower," Carlos muttered, leaving me alone in the living room. I sat on the couch, feeling the weight of the situation on my shoulders. Dolores' illness was not only emotionally challenging, but also financially challenging. As I listened to the shower run, my thoughts drifted to the folder I kept in the study, full of documents related to our mortgage. I got up and took it out, checking the numbers once more. We had been so careful, so far-sighted. Years of savings, of living just enough, everything to have this house. And now, with Dolores' illness, what would happen? When Carlos came out of the shower, he found me surrounded by papers on the dining room table. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sounding tired and distant. "Just reviewing our finances," I replied, trying to sound casual. "With your mother, I thought we should have a clear idea of where we are." He sat across from me, running a hand through his damp hair. "And we'll be fine," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We've been careful. The mortgage is in order, we have some savings. We'll be able to handle this." Carlos nodded absently, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Thanks for taking care of all this," he murmured. "We're a team, remember?" I said, reaching out to take his hand. Through thick and thin. That night, lying in bed, neither of us could sleep. The room was silent, but I could feel the tension in the air, the thoughts swirling in our minds. "Carlos?" I whispered in the darkness. "Yes," he replied, his voice barely audible. "I love you. We will get through this together." There was a pause before he responded, "I love you too." But as I fell asleep, I couldn't help but feel like something had changed. Our marriage, which had always seemed so solid, suddenly felt like a house of cards, vulnerable to the slightest breeze. Dolores' illness not only threatened her health, but it also seemed to be exposing cracks in our relationship that I didn't know existed. With these disturbing thoughts, I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, not knowing that this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test not only our love, but also our integrity and determination. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Dolores' health was slowly deteriorating, like a candle that burns out little by little. Each visit to the hospital left us with more questions than answers, and the tension in our home grew by the day. One afternoon, after another exhausting hospital visit, Carlos and I returned home in silence. The air between us was thick with unspoken words and repressed emotions. As soon as we walked through the door, Carlos exploded. "Why can't you show more interest in my mother's health?" he snapped at me, his voice full of bitterness. I was stunned. "What do you mean? I've been there every visit, It's not enough," he interrupted me. "You barely talk to her, you barely ask her how she feels. It's like you don't care." His words hit me like a slap. "How can you say that? I've been doing my best to balance work, our home, and hospital visits." Carlos let out a bitter laugh. "Balance? My mother is dying and you worry about balance. I felt anger begin to bubble up inside me. "I have a career, Carlos. I can't just abandon everything. Someone has to pay the bills, remember? Is that more important than family?" he asked, his eyes flashing with fury. "You're my family," I shouted, frustrated. "And I'm trying to keep this family afloat while what?" he challenged me. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to tell him that while I was taking care of everything, he seemed to sink deeper and deeper into despair and self-pity. "Nothing," I muttered, exhausted. "I'm doing the best I can, Carlos." He stared at me for a moment, then dropped the bomb. "I need you to move to Valencia." "What?" I asked, sure I had heard wrong. "My mother needs full-time care. She can't stay home alone and I can't be there all the time. I need you to move to Valencia to take care of her." I was speechless for a moment, trying to process what I had just heard. "Carlos, I can't just move to Valencia. I have my job here, our house. Is your job more important than my mother's health?" he asked, his voice full of accusation. It's not just about my job, I responded, struggling to stay calm. It's our life here, the house we've worked so hard for. The house can wait, he interrupted. Not my mother. I felt like the world was falling apart around me. Carlos, I know you're worried about your mother, but you can't expect me to abandon my entire life. There must be another solution. There is no other solution, he said firmly. Someone has to be with her all the time, and I can't quit my job. You're the only option. The only option? I repeated, incredulously. What about a nurse? Or taking her to a skilled residence? Carlos shook his head. You know we can't afford that. Besides, my mother would refuse. She trusts you. I felt like the walls were closing around me. Carlos, please think about what you are asking for. You would be destroying my career, my independence. Your independence, he spat the word as if it were poison. Is that all you care about? Of course not, I shouted, frustrated. But you can't expect me to give up everything I've built. I've worked hard to get where I am. And I've worked hard to keep this family together, he responded. But it doesn't seem like that means anything to you. His words hurt me deeply. That's not fair, Carlos. I've been by your side through all of this. I've been juggling everything to keep our life together while I what? He challenged me again. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. While you sink deeper and deeper into despair. I understand that you're worried about your mother, but you can't just ignore everything else. Carlos looked at me with a mixture of pain and fury. My mother is dying, and you worry about your career. I never thought you would be so selfish. That word, selfish, hit me like a punch to the gut. I'm not selfish for wanting to maintain the life we've built together, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. If you really cared about our family, you wouldn't hesitate to do this, Carlos responded. What about you? I asked, frustration finally boiling over. Why do I have to be the one to sacrifice everything? Why can't you be the one to move to Valencia? You know I can't quit my job, he replied, as if it were obvious. And I can? I asked, incredulously. Your job isn't as important as mine, he said, and in that moment, I felt something break inside me. I can't believe you just said that, I whispered, hurt and angry. Carlos seemed to realize what he had said and tried to take it back. I didn't mean. It's just that my job provides most of our income. And I've been paying the mortgage, I reminded him. I've been maintaining this house while you focused on your mother. Are you saying I should ignore my mother? He asked, his voice rising again. No, I'm saying you can't expect me to be the only one making sacrifices, I responded. We were silent for a moment, the tension between us palpable. Finally, Carlos spoke, I need you to do this. For me, for my mother, for our family. I felt tears threatening to spill, but I held them back. I can't, Carlos. I can't just abandon my life here. Then you leave me no choice, he said, his voice cold and distant. What do you mean? I asked, afraid of the answer. If you're not willing to do this for our family, then maybe we shouldn't be a family. His words left me breathless. Are you threatening me with divorce? Carlos did not respond immediately, but his silence was response enough. In that moment, I felt like everything we had worked for, everything we had built together, was falling apart. The man who once promised to love and support me through thick and thin was now giving me a cruel ultimatum, my life or our marriage. I turned around, unable to look him in the eyes. I need time to think, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. There's not much to think about, Carlos responded. Either you move to Valencia to take care of my mother, or our marriage is over. With those words, he left the room, leaving me alone with my turbulent thoughts and an uncertain future. Carlos's words resonated in my head like an endless echo. Divorce or taking care of Dolores? How had we gotten to this point? I felt trapped, backed up against an invisible wall, with options quickly running out. I spent the night awake, tossing and turning in bed, while Carlos slept on the couch. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my life falling apart before me. My career, for which I had fought so hard, was disappearing like smoke. Our house, our home, now seemed like a golden cage. When the first rays of sun filtered through the window, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be a victim. I wasn't going to let Carlos dictate the terms of my life. I got up, dressed and left the room. Carlos was already in the kitchen, making coffee. The silence between us was heavy, charged with unresolved tension. "Good morning," he murmured without looking at me. I didn't answer. Instead, I stood in front of him, arms crossed. "We need to talk." Carlos looked up, his expression a mix of tiredness and resignation. "Have you made a decision?" "Yes," I responded, my voice firm. "I'm not going to move to Valencia." I watched as his face hardened, his eyes shining with a mix of disappointment and anger. Before he could speak, I continued, "And no, I'm not going to accept the divorce without a fight." Carlos looked surprised for a moment, then recovered. "There's not much you can do. If you're not willing to take care of my mother, then..." "So what?" I interrupted him. "Are you going to throw away years of marriage? Are you going to destroy everything we've built together?" "I'm not the one being selfish here," he replied, his voice rising. "You're the one who refuses to help my mother." I felt anger bubbling inside me. Selfish? Are you calling me selfish for wanting to maintain my career, my independence? I've been by your side through all of this, Carlos. I've been juggling work, home, hospital visits. And you've been so absorbed in your own misery that you haven't even noticed everything I've been doing. Carlos seemed to step back, surprised by my outburst. I don't. No, listen to me, I continued, not giving him a chance to interrupt. I've been reviewing our finances, trying to find a way to pay for your mother's treatment without us having to sell the house. I've been talking to doctors, researching treatment options. I've been doing everything I can to keep this family alive. Float while you sank deeper and deeper into despair. I watched as Carlos's expression changed, surprise replacing anger. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know," I replied. "You were too busy blaming me for not doing enough." There was a moment of tense silence. Carlos seemed to be struggling with his own thoughts. Finally, he spoke, "But someone has to take care of my mother. We can't afford a nurse. And have you considered all the options?" I asked. "Have you looked into assistance programs? Have you talked to your siblings about sharing responsibility?" Carlos looked down. "No, I thought that I would sacrifice everything," I finished for him. "That I would abandon my career, my life, everything I am, without questioning anything. I only wanted the best for my mother," he murmured. "I understand," I said, softening my tone a bit. "But you can't expect me to carry all the weight. We're a team, Carlos. Or at least, we used to be." I saw the guilt in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I didn't realize." "No, you didn't realize," I replied. "And now you want to threaten me with divorce." Carlos ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "I don't know what else to do." "Well, let me tell you something," I said, my voice taking on a warning tone. "Divorce won't be the only thing you'll face if you continue down this path." I saw his eyes widen in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been running this family while you've been wallowing in self-pity. I've been managing our finances, paying the mortgage, keeping everything afloat. If you think you can just throw me out and keep everything, you're sorely mistaken." Carlos visibly paled. "No, that's not what I want." "No?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because that's exactly what it sounds like. You give me an impossible ultimatum and expect me to give up without a fight." "I just wanted you to take care of my mother," he said weakly. "And I want to take care of her," I responded. "But not at the cost of destroying my life and our relationship. There has to be another way." I saw how the internal struggle was reflected in Carlos's face. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. "You're right. I've been an idiot." I felt some of the tension leave my body, but I held my ground. "Yes, you have been. I'm sorry," he said, and for the first time in weeks, I saw sincerity in his eyes. "I don't know what happened to me. I was so worried about my mother that I lost sight of everything else." "I understand you're worried," I said, softening my tone a bit. But you can't expect me to carry everything. We need to find a solution together. Carlos nodded slowly. You're right. Can we talk about this? Find a solution together? I felt a small glimmer of hope, but I remained cautious. We can try. But I need you to understand something, Carlos. I'm not going to give up my life, my career. And if you threaten me with divorce again, I won't, he quickly interrupted me. I promise. I don't know what I was thinking. I nodded slowly. Good. Because I need you to know that I'm willing to fight. For me, for us, for everything we've built together. But I need you to be my partner in this, not my opponent. I watched as Carlos swallowed, processing my words. I understand, he finally said. And I'm sorry. Really. Can we start over? Find a solution together? I felt some of the tension leave my body. It wasn't a solution, but it was a start. Yes, I replied. We can try. Carlos extended his hand, like a peace offering. I took it, feeling a mix of relief and caution. I knew we had a long road ahead of us, that this was just the beginning of a difficult conversation. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Let's sit down, I said. We have a lot to talk about. And so, with the morning sun filtering through the windows, we sat at the kitchen table, ready to face the challenge ahead together. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I was determined to fight for what was fair, for what was right. And if Carlos was willing to be my partner in this fight, maybe, just maybe, we could find a solution that worked for everyone. After our intense conversation, Carlos and I agreed to work together to find a solution. However, something kept bothering me. Carlos's insistence that I move to Valencia, his reluctance to consider other options, there was something that didn't add up. I decided to investigate further. One night, while Carlos was sleeping, I sneaked into the study. With my heart pounding, I turned on the computer and began reviewing our financial documents. At first, everything seemed normal. Our bank accounts, mortgage payments, monthly expenses, everything was as I remembered. But then, in a folder hidden at the bottom of the desk, I found something that made my blood run cold. No way, I muttered to myself, as I opened file after file. Loans. Large sums of money that Carlos had borrowed without my knowledge. And worst of all, our house, our home, was listed as collateral. I felt the ground opening beneath my feet. How could he have done this? How could he put everything we had worked for at risk? With trembling hands, I continued investigating. The loans dated back several months, coinciding with the beginning of Dolores' illness. Had Carlos been using this money to pay for secret treatments? Or was there something else? The deeper I went, the darker the scene became. I discovered transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, payments to names I had never heard of. It was like he had been living with a stranger this whole time. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. Carlos's insistence that I move to Valencia, his reluctance to consider other options for Dolores' care. It wasn't just about her mother. It was about getting away, keeping me busy while he dealt with this financial disaster. Maria, what are you doing up at this hour? Carlos's voice startled me. He was standing in the doorway of the study, his hair disheveled and his eyes half closed with sleep. For a moment, I considered lying, shutting everything down, and pretending I was working on a late project. But the anger and betrayal he felt was too strong. What is this, Carlos? I asked, turning the screen towards him. I watched as the color drained from his face. His eyes widened, a mix of fear and guilt reflecting in them. Maria, I can explain it, he stammered, slowly approaching. Explain what? I blurted out. How have you been taking out loans behind my back? How have you put our house at risk without even consulting me? Carlos collapsed in the chair in front of me, burying his face in his hands. I'm sorry, he murmured. I didn't know what else to do. You didn't know what else to do? I repeated, incredulously. How about talking to me? How about being honest with your wife? He looked up, his eyes filled with tears. I was scared. My mother's treatments are so expensive. And then I made some mistakes. Any mistakes? I asked, my voice shaking with rage. Carlos, you have mortgaged our future. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I could fix it before you realized it. I thought if I could get you to move to Valencia, I'd have time to fix things. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. That's why you wanted me to leave. It wasn't just about your mother, was it? You wanted to keep me away so I wouldn't find out about this. Carlos didn't respond, but his silence was all the confirmation he needed. How could you? I whispered, tears beginning to fall down my cheeks. How could you betray me like that? I'm sorry, he repeated, his voice barely audible. I'm so sorry, Maria. I don't know what I was thinking. I stood up from the chair, needing to put distance between us. Where is the money, Carlos? Was it all for your mother's treatments? There was a pause, a hesitation that told me everything I needed to know before he spoke. No, not everything. What else? I demanded. Carlos took a deep breath. I made some investments. I thought I could make the money back quickly, pay off the loans before you knew it. Investments, I repeated, the word sounding bitter in my mouth. What kind of investments? Cryptocurrencies, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. A friend told me it was a sure opportunity. I felt like I was short of breath. Our entire future, everything we had worked for, put at risk by a desperate gamble. How much did you lose? I asked, although part of me didn't want to know the answer. Carlos closed his eyes, as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Almost everything. Those two words fell between us like a sentence. Almost everything. Years of saving, of sacrifice, of building a life together, it was all gone. Maria, please, Carlos begged, standing up and trying to approach me. We can work it out. We'll find a way. I took a step back, keeping my distance. How? I asked, my voice cracking with emotion. How are we going to solve this, Carlos? You've put our house, our future at risk. You've lied, you've hidden things. How am I supposed to trust you after this? I'll fix it, he insisted. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll work overtime, sell the car, whatever. I shook my head, feeling a mixture of anger and despair. It's not just the money, Carlos. It's the trust. You've broken it. We were silent for a moment, the weight of the situation falling on us. Finally, I made a decision. I need time, I said. Time to think, to process all this. What do you mean? Carlos asked, fear evident in his voice. I mean I can't be here right now. I need space. I saw the panic in his eyes. Maria, please don't leave. We can work it out together. No, Carlos, I responded firmly. You've solved enough on your own. Now I need time to decide what to do. With those words, I left the studio, leaving Carlos alone with the weight of his actions. As I packed a suitcase, my mind was spinning. How had we gotten to this point? How could I trust him again? One thing was clear, our marriage, our life together, everything I thought I knew, nothing would be the same. And as I closed the door to our house that night, I couldn't help but wonder if we could ever recover from this betrayal. I spent the next few days in a hotel, trying to process everything I had discovered. Carlos's betrayal, the secret loans, the failed investments, everything was spinning in my head incessantly. But as the initial shock faded, rage began to take its place. I decided it was time to confront Carlos once and for all. No more lies, no more secrets. It was time to put all the cards on the table. I texted him, "We need to talk. I'll be home in an hour." His response was immediate, "I'll be waiting for you." The ride home was an emotional roller coaster. Part of me wanted to scream, another part wanted to cry, and a small part still hoped there was a reasonable explanation for all of this. When I entered the house, I found Carlos sitting on the couch, looking haggard and red-eyed. It was evident that he hadn't slept much in the last few days either. "Maria," he said, getting up quickly. I raised a hand to stop him. "No, Carlos. This time I'm talking." I pulled out of my bag a folder full of documents, copies of the loans, records of the transfers, everything I had discovered. "Explain this to me," I demanded, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. Carlos visibly paled as he saw the documents spread out in front of him. His hands shook as he picked up one of the papers. How did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That doesn't matter," I replied firmly. "What matters is that you lied to me. You hid things from me. You put our entire future at risk." Carlos collapsed back onto the couch, as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm so sorry, Maria." "Apologies aren't enough," I said, struggling to stay calm. "I want the truth, Carlos. The whole truth." He nodded slowly, running a hand over his face. "It all started when my mother got sick," he began. "The treatments were so expensive. I thought I could handle the situation on my own." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "We're a team, Carlos. Or at least, I thought we were." "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that I'd disappoint you, that you'd think I couldn't handle things. And investments in cryptocurrencies?" I pressed. Carlos closed his eyes, as if the memory was too painful. "A co-worker told me about a chance. He said I could duplicate my money in a short time. I thought I could solve everything at once. But you lost everything," I concluded. He nodded miserably. "Almost everything. And then I panicked. I kept asking for more loans, trying to recover the lost. Using our house as a guarantee," I added, rabies bubbling in my voice. I know it," he said quickly. He was stupid and selfish. I wasn't thinking clearly. I sat in the armchair in front of him, trying to process everything. "And the ultimatum? Why did you insist so much that I moved to Valencia?" Carlos paled even more, if that was possible. I needed time," he admitted. "Time to try to fix things before you find out." I felt that anger invaded me again. "So it wasn't really your mother, right? It was about staying away, hiding your mistakes." "No, not just that," he stuttered. "I really needed help with my mother, but, yes, I also wanted to keep all this hidden." I got up, unable to continue sitting. "Do you realize what you have done, Carlos? You have not only put our financial future at risk, you have betrayed my trust. You have lied, you have hidden things, you have manipulated the situation." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "And I'm so sorry, Maria. I will do anything to fix it." It was then that I made a decision. "Yes, you will," I said, my voice acquiring a steel tone. "Because if you don't, I will exhibit everything." Carlos looked up, the fear evident in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I want to say that I have all the evidence here," I said, pointing out the documents. "Fraudulent loans, improper use of our property as a guarantee without my consent. Do you think your boss would like to know how one of your employees has been handling your personal finances?" I saw how the color completely abandoned Carlos's face. For the first time since I knew him, I saw true fear in his eyes. "Maria, please," he begged. "I'll lose my job. I could go to jail." "You had to think about that before putting everything at risk for what we have worked," I replied coldly. Carlos got up, approaching me with his hands extended in a supply gesture. "I beg you, Maria. I will do anything. Whatever you want." I stared at him, feeling a mixture of emotions, anger, disappointment, but also a hint of compassion by the broken man in front of me. "This is what is going to happen," I said finally. "First, you will withdraw that ridiculous ultimatum about moving to Valencia. Second, we will sell the car and anything else of value to start paying those loans. Third, we will seek professional help to handle our finances and the situation of your mother." Carlos nodded frantically. Yes, whatever you say. "And most importantly," I continued, "no more lies. No more secret. If you hide something again, anything, I will not hesitate to expose all this. I promise," he said quickly. "I will be completely honest from now on." I looked at him for a long moment, trying to decide if he could trust his words. Finally, I sighed. "One last thing," I added. "We are going to look for a couple therapy. If there is any possibility of saving this marriage, we need professional help." Carlos nodded again, the relief evident in his face. "Of course. Whatever is necessary." I walked away from him, needing space. Do not believe that this fixes things between us, I warned. Trust has broken, Carlos. It will take time and much effort on your part to rebuild it, if I can ever fully trust you. I understand it, he said gently. I will do my best to win your trust again. I promise you. While heading to the room, leaving Carlos only with the weight of his actions, I could not help asking me if we could really overcome this. The way ahead would be difficult, full of uncomfortable challenges and conversations. But for now, at least, we had a plan. And while closing the door of the room, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and determination. I didn't know what the future gave us, but I was determined to face it with open eyes. No more secrets, no more lies. It was time to rebuild, step by step, what Carlos had risked so recklessly. The days following our confrontation were tense and full of awkward conversations. Carlos, faithful to his word, withdrew the ultimatum on my move to Valencia and began taking measures to address the financial disaster he had created. We sold the car, some jewels and other valuables. Each penny was directly to pay the loans that Carlos had acquired. However, despite these efforts, I felt that something fundamental had broken among us. Trust, that essential pillar of any relationship, had collapsed as a castle of cards. One afternoon, while we checked our finances at the kitchen table, I made a decision. I'm going to move to Valencia, I suddenly announced. Carlos looked up from the papers, surprised. But I thought you didn't want to go. I withdrew the ultimatum, you don't have to do it. I shook my head. I don't do it for you, Carlos. I do it for Dolores. And for me. I don't understand, he said, frowning. I took a deep breath before explaining. Your mother needs help, that's true. But I also need space to think, to process everything that has happened. I can't do that here, with you. I saw how pain was reflected in his eyes. Maria, please. I'm trying to fix things. I know, I replied softly. But some things cannot be fixed so easily. The confidence we had, you destroyed it, Carlos. And I need time and space to decide if I can, or if I want to rebuild it. Carlos sank into his chair, defeated. Does this mean that, what are you leaving me? I carefully thought my words before answering. It means that I need time. I am not asking for divorce, at least not now. But I need distance to think clearly. And what about our financial problems? He asked, a touch of panic in his voice. You created them, Carlos, I said firmly. You will have to deal with them. I will continue to contribute to my part of the mortgage, but the rest, that is your responsibility. I saw how the reality of the situation settled in it. For the first time, he seemed to completely understand the consequences of his actions. When will you leave? He finally asked, his voice just a whisper. In a week, I replied. I have already found a small apartment to rent in Valencia, near your mother's house. Carlos nodded, as if each movement cost him a great effort. Can I help you move? I considered your offer for a moment before denying my head. No, I think it's better if I do this on my own. I need this time for me, Carlos. The following days passed in a blur of preparations. I packed my things, I said goodbye to my colleagues at work, I had reached an agreement to work remotely, and prepared for my new life in Valencia. The morning of my departure, Carlos was standing at the door of our apartment, seeing me loading my bags in the taxi. Maria, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I'm so sorry. For everything. I looked at it, feeling a mixture of emotions, sadness, disappointment, but also a hint of hope. I know, Carlos. I hope you use this time to reflect and make the necessary changes. I will, he promised. I swear. With a last assent, I went up to the taxi. While we were moving away, I saw Carlos in the rearview mirror, a lonely figure at the door of what was once our happy home. The trip to Valencia was long and full of reflections. Was I doing the right thing? Could we, Carlos and I, overcome this one day? What expected me in Valencia? When I finally got to my new apartment, small but cozy, I felt overwhelmed by a mixture of emotions. Fear, emotion, sadness, hope. Everything mixed in a whirlwind inside me. After unpacking the essential, I decided to visit Dolores. I needed to see her, explain the situation and offer my help. When I got home, he received me with a mixture of surprise and joy. "Maria, dear. I didn't expect to see you so soon. Where is Carlos?" I guided her gently to the sofa, sitting by her side. "Dolores, there is something I need to tell you." During the next hour, I explained everything that had happened, omitting some of the most painful details to protect it. I told him about financial problems, about my decision to move to Valencia, about the situation with Carlos. Dolores listened in silence, his face through a range of emotions: shock, sadness, disappointment, and finally, a determination that reminded me a lot of my own. "Oh, Maria," he finally said, taking my hands among his. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea that that my son could do something like that." "It's not your fault, Dolores," I assured him. "Carlos made his own decisions." She nodded slowly. "Even so, I feel responsible. If I hadn't sick." "No," I firmly interrupted it. "Your illness is no excuse for Carlos's actions. He had options, and chose to lie and hide things." Dolores looked at me with a mixture of sadness and admiration. "You are a strong woman, Maria. I don't know how to thank you for you to come here, after everything that has happened." "I came for you, Dolores," I said sincerely. "Regardless of what happens between Carlos and I, you are still important for me. I want to help you in what I can." I saw how tears were formed in their eyes. "Thank you, dear. You don't know how much that means for me." From that day, we established a routine. I spent the morning working from my apartment, and the afternoons with Payne. He helped her with her medications, accompanied her to her medical appointments, and simply was company. Carlos regularly called his mother and me. With Payne, his conversations were brief and tense. With me, they were uncomfortable and full of repeated apologies. One night, as I had dinner at her home, she surprised me with a question. "Maria, do you think you can forgive Carlos one day?" I left my fork, carefully considering my answer. "I don't know, Dolores. A part of me wants to do it, but another part, I don't know if I can trust him again." She nodded. "Forgiveness is a difficult, dear path. But remember, forgive does not mean forgetting or allowing you to hurt you again. It means freeing yourself from the weight of the grudge." His words gave me a lot to think about. As I returned to my apartment that night, I reflected on everything that had happened. Carlos had made terrible mistakes, had betrayed my confidence in the worst possible way. But he was also making efforts to correct his mistakes. Would it be enough? Could we rebuild what had broken? I had no clear answers, just the certainty that the way ahead would be long and difficult. That night, while preparing to sleep, I looked out the window towards the lights of Valencia. This city, which had initially seen as a forced exile, had become a shelter, a place to heal and reflect. I didn't know what the future gave me. I did not know if Carlos and I would find a way back to each other, or if our paths would separate permanently. But I did know one thing: I had made the right decision to come here. While Dolores slowly improved under my care, I was also healing. I was rediscovering my strength, my independence, my ability to face challenges that I never imagined. And while I got into bed, I felt a peace that I had not experienced in a long time. Tomorrow would be another day, with his own challenges and surprises. But for now, at this time, it was exactly where I needed to be. The days in Valencia became weeks, and the weeks in months. My routine with Payne had become comfortable and comforting. We spent the afternoons chatting, sharing stories, and sometimes simply enjoying the mutual company in silence. However, there was an underlying tension, an unbeaten question that floated between us. One afternoon, while we had tea in his small garden, Dolores finally broke the silence that had maintained so long. "Maria," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there is something I need to ask." I lowered my cup, feeling that an important conversation was coming. "Of course, Dolores. What happens?" She took a deep breath before continuing. "Carlos, did you really use loans for my treatments?" The question took me by surprise. Until that time, he had assumed that Dolores knew nothing about Carlos's financial problems. "Why questions that?" I replied cautiously. Dolores sighed, his eyes full of a sadness that broke my heart. "I've been reviewing my medical bills. The amounts do not match what Carlos told me I was spending. And then I found this." He pulled an envelope out of his pocket and handed it to me with trembling hands. Inside there were bank extracts and receipts for transfers to accounts that I did not recognize. "Oh, Dolores," I sighed, feeling a mixture of relief for not having to hide the truth and sadness for having to confirm his suspicions. "Then it is true," she said, plus a statement then a question. "My son, my Carlos. Has he been lying to both of us?" I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of truth between us. "Yes, Dolores. I'm afraid yes." What followed was a long and painful conversation. I told everything to Dolores, the secret loans, the failed investments, the ultimatum that Carlos had given me. She listened in silence, tears running down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Maria," he said finally. "I never imagined that my son could do something like that." "It's not your fault, Dolores," I assured him, taking his hands in mine. "Carlos made his own decisions." She pressed my hands, a determination spark shining in her eyes. "You're right. And it's time to face the consequences of those decisions." That night, Dolores and I made a decision. It was time to confront Carlos, once and for all. We called him the next day, asking him to come to Valencia. He arrived 2 days later, wearing nervous and confused. "Mom, Maria," he greeted, his eyes moving between us. "What happens? Why the urgency?" Dolores got in his chair, his firm voice when he spoke. "Sit, Carlos. We have a lot to talk about." During the following hours, Dolores and I confront Carlos with all the evidence we had gathered. Bank extracts, receipts, inconsistencies in their stories. With each new revelation, I saw how Carlos sank more and more in his chair, the color leaving his face. "How could you?" Dolores asked, his voice broken. "How could you lie like this? To use my disease as an excuse for your fraud?" "Mom, Carlos began, but he stopped, apparently speechless for the first time. I kept silent, observing the exchange between mother and son. I saw how disappointment and pain were reflected in the eyes of Dolores, and how shame and repentance finally seemed to reach Carlos. "Sorry," he finally murmured. "I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." "You weren't thinking," I replied, my cold voice. "You were acting for selfishness and cowardice." Carlos looked at me, his pleading eyes. "Maria, please. I've been trying to fix things. I've been paying loans." "It's not enough, Carlos," I interrupted it. "It's not just about money. It is about the trust you destroyed, the lies you said, how you used your mother's disease as a shield for your actions." Dolores nodded, supporting my words. "Son, I love you. I will always do it. But what you have done, I can't simply forgive and forget it." I saw how the reality of the situation finally settled in Carlos. His mother, the woman who had always supported him unconditionally, now looked at him with a mixture of pain and disappointment. And I, his wife, the woman with whom he had promised to share his life, was sitting kilometers away from him. What can I do?" he asked, his voice just a whisper. I exchanged a look with pain before answering. "You can start with being completely honest. With us, with your creditors, with everyone. And then, you can accept the consequences of your actions." The following weeks were an activity whirlwind. Carlos, finally facing the reality of his actions, began to unravel the network of lies he had woven. He confessed to his boss about the misuse of the company's funds, which resulted in his immediate dismissal. He contacted the banks and began negotiating payment plans for loans. Meanwhile, Dolores and I became closer than ever. She became the ally that I never knew that she needed, offering support and understanding while sailing through the turbulent waters of my ruined marriage. It was during one of our long night conversations that I made my final decision. "I'm going to ask for divorce," I told Dolores, feeling a mixture of sadness and liberation when pronouncing words aloud. She took my hand, her eyes full of understanding. "I know, dear. And I want you to know that I support you completely." Tears that I didn't know I was containing began to fall. "Thank you, Dolores. You don't know how much that means for me." "You are a strong woman, Maria," he said, squeezing my hand. "You deserve to be happy, you deserve peace. And if that means letting go to my son, then so." When I finally communicated my decision to Carlos, I saw a resignation in his eyes that told me that he had also seen him come. "I understand it," he said gently. "And I'm sorry. For everything." The divorce process was surprisingly civilized. Carlos, perhaps in an attempt to redeem himself, did not fight for anything. He accepted all my terms without discussion. The day we signed the divorce papers, I felt as if a huge weight rose from my shoulders. It was the end of a chapter of my life, but also the beginning of a new one. I decided to stay in Valencia. I had found a peace here that I didn't want to leave. In addition, my relationship with Dolores had become something beautiful for me. "Are you sure?" Dolores asked me when I told him my decision. "You don't have to stay for me." I smiled, feeling a certainty that I had not experienced in a long time. "I don't stay alone for you, Dolores. I stay for me. I have found a home here, a new life." While watching the sunset from the balcony of my apartment that night, I reflected on the trip that had taken me here. I had come to Valencia feeling lost, betrayed, broken. And now, months later, I felt stronger than ever. He had lost a husband, it's true. But I had gained something much more valuable: my freedom, my mental peace, and a friendship that I never expected to find. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I looked at him with hope and emotion. I did not know what I had tomorrow, but I knew something with certainty. Whatever it was, I was ready to face it. With a smile on my lips, I raised my glass to the starry sky of Valencia. For the new beginnings, I gave silently. And while the night fell on the city, I felt a deep peace to settle in my heart. The road had been difficult, but I had finally found my way back to myself.